Thanks for being here today. For the next 20 minutes, I'll be discussing how an effective alerting and detection strategy will reduce alert fatigue and burnout for an incident response team and giving tips on how to build that effective alerting and detection strategy framework within the team. Really quick, I want to make sure everyone can see my screen and hear me well. If I see no comments, I'm going to assume everyone can hear me. Cool. So before I begin, I thought I would introduce myself. So my name is Lee. I graduated from the University of Washington in 2018, and I'm currently in a part-time cybersecurity master's program at NYU. For my full-time job, I'm a security operations engineer at Blend. And for anyone who's not familiar with what Blend does, we are a cloud-based platform that powers end-to-end customer journeys for any banking product. Our goal is to lead the change to a customer-centric banking world. A fun fact about me is I love to ski, and I'm extremely excited to be back on the slopes this year. So before diving into the talk, I wanted to go over some definitions that I'll be using today. Some people may be familiar with these definitions, but I just wanted to establish a baseline just in case anyone is new to security. Starting off with security operations team. This is a team, like a team that I currently work on, who is responsible for detecting, analyzing, and responding to cybersecurity incidences, also known as events, that usually come through as alerts. So that kind of leads me to the next definition. What is an alert? An alert is a notification that something suspicious has happened in the environment and it needs to be investigated to see if it's a true positive, something actually malicious, or a false positive. Security operations teams like mine are responsible for creating these alerts and responsible for responding and triaging to them. The engineer who's responsible to be the first responder to a triggered alert is called an on-call engineer. An on-call engineer is someone who can be contacted outside of normal working hours. Yes, that means 2 a.m., 3 a.m., etc. You can imagine how draining it can be to always need to be available to triage and respond to events. 24 hours for an entire week, maybe even 2. Now imagine that most of those events are not even triggered based off of suspicious or malicious behavior. Those are called false positives. A false positive is an event that happens in the environment that is not malicious or may not even be suspicious. This can be thought of as the boy that cried wolf syndrome. An on-call engineer gets alerted and it says, help, something bad is happening in the environment. But when the engineer goes to help, really nothing malicious or even suspicious or bad is happening. Now imagine this happens multiple times in a row in the middle of the night, when you're at dinner with friends, when you're trying to catch a movie or catch up with your parents. It can become extremely frustrating and exhausting. I've been doing on-call for about 3 years now, and I can say this has happened to me more than once. I remember a time I got alerted at 2 a.m. It was a false positive. A coworker was doing normal activities testing in their dev environment. I then got alerted at 2:30 a.m., again for the same false positive. Then for a third time at 3 a.m. And honestly, at that point, I just wanted to start crying because I knew that these alerts that were coming in were false positives, and I was so exhausted and tired, but I still needed to wake up to them just to close them, even though I was 90% sure it was the same false positive. As you can see, this can lead you to be extremely unmotivated at work. And I can say for the next couple of days, I was extremely unmotivated. And this kind of leads us into our last definition, alert fatigue. Alert fatigue is the idea of getting desensitized to alerts because the overload of alerts, especially since in most cases, they turn out to be false positives. Alert fatigue can almost be seen as a synonym, specifically in the security operations world. And that kind of leads me to the problem that we'll be trying to resolve today, burnout. Burnout is a work-related stress, which can be identified in a couple different ways. And you can actually see it here in this photo. In the photo, this employee is emotionally and physically exhausted. The employee has become cynical. They have a lack of interest at work. They're not feeling passionate or motivated in their projects and workplace in general, and ultimately feeling useless. This can lead to personal consequences and professional consequences. On the personal side, it can get as dire as alcohol or substance abuse, isolation from friends and family, anger towards family members, and an inability to fulfill responsibilities. On the professional side, it can lead to job dissatisfaction, withdrawing from colleagues and friends, inability to do a job well, and a drain on company resources. For obvious reasons, this is bad. for us as employees and for our companies as employers. This is why it is so important to have a strong alerting and detection framework in place. When done poorly, an incident response team can flood themselves with low signal alerts, create fatigue, morale issues, and ultimately generate a net negative impact for their mission of detecting and triaging. But when done well, an engineer is feeling accomplished, motivated, and ready to protect the environment. So this leads us to the question, okay, how do we create this effective alerting and detection framework? Well, the answer is high fidelity alerts. A high fidelity alert is an alert that contains data an engineer can trust and act on. It means you can trust when an alert comes through, it most likely is not a false positive and will contain documentation that can be used effectively to triage and respond to the alert. So let's walk through how we create these high fidelity alerts. There are 3 things that need to be done to create the high fidelity alert. 1, create alerts that trigger based off of true events. The goal is no false positives. The method I recommend to create quality alerts is through purple teaming exercises. Purple teaming exercises help to scope the alert as necessary to reduce the amount of false positives by testing exactly what you are looking for. This allows you to make sure the alert criteria is not too broad and not too narrow, and allows you to validate your alert. It allows you to make sure the assumptions you are using to create these alerts are correct, and actually these alerts actually trigger based off of true events. The next important thing is high quality documentation. This way, an engineer is able to understand the alert that got triggered, how to begin to triage the alert, and how to effectively respond. Shortly, we will go over what information needs to be added to the documentation to make it effective for on-call engineers. No alert should be deployed without quality documentation. Otherwise, the alert may be triggering on true positives, but if the engineer doesn't understand the issue, how are they supposed to resolve the alert? The alert just becomes useless. And it can be extremely draining on the engineer themselves, needing to spend time understanding and figuring how to triage this alert. Last but not least, peer review. You want to make sure the documentation and alert is understood by your peers, and not only the people involved in creating the alert and the documentation. This will also make sure that validation has been done before the alert is deployed in production, and make sure the alert criteria is scoped to avoid false positives and actually triggers based off of true events. So starting off with, what is purple teaming? So it's kind of confusing, but purple teaming is not a separate team. It's actually the idea of members of the blue team, like the one that I work on, and the red team working closely together to continuously enhance security controls and defensive mechanisms for the company. During a purple team exercise, you accurately simulate threat scenarios and facilitate the creation of new techniques designed to prevent and detect the new type of threats. It allows you to test the alerts you currently have in your environment and see how effective they are. How many false positive? Did it catch all edge cases? Was there a way to bypass the alert? This way, you can better the detection you already have in your environment by scoping the alert criteria as needed. But also, purple teaming gives you the ability to create new detections much quicker. Since the red team has already gone in and taken advantage of the vulnerabilities, the blue team can use those logs and notes about vulnerabilities to create these new alerts. And it makes it much easier because the blue team already knows exactly what they're looking for. And they can even do purple teaming again to then validate these new alerts in the alert pipeline. So I thought we could walk through a quick purple teaming exercise. And so the demo has all been done in a test environment. It is extremely important to be done in a test environment, especially while purple teaming, since you don't want to download malware or change any configuration on your own box, on your own laptop, because that will later potentially make you vulnerable. Since it's a shorter talk, I'm not going to walk through how I built the test environment, but I did create a GitHub repository for this talk, and there I posted all my documentation and scripts on how to build the test environment. The link is on my resource slide, which is the second to last slide of this talk, and I will make sure it is made available to everyone at the talk. Also, I used all open source tooling for this demo, aka it's all free, so everyone will be able to set it up and play around with the tools and methodologies I've discussed today. So what are we going to see in this demo? we will see a malicious actor logging into an Ubuntu box. A box can also be like a server or your laptop. And we're going to see them update your host entry file, which is a local plain text file that maps servers or host names to IP addresses. Then a blue teamer will use the logs gathered by the agent on the box. On this box, I have pre-installed OS query to then create a query to alert when this happens in the future. So a little bit of context, when we use DNS to correlate websites to IP addresses. For example, when you type bankofamerica.com, DNS routes you to the correct IP address. The host entry file has priority over DNS. So if that file is updated and a different URL and IP address correlation is inputted, it will take priority on the box. So for example, if a malicious actor updates the host file entry box, so when you type in bankofamerica.com, it points you to a different IP address, you will then get redirected to a location you did not intend. That can be extremely bad, since if they're creative hackers, they can route you to a page that looks exactly like bankofamerica.com. Then when you put in your credentials, the hackers have now stolen them. This is a great alert since it's extremely rare that a host entry file would manually get updated on a user's laptop or box. So now that we have the context, let's walk through the demo. So here, what you will see is I'm pinging bankofamerica.com, and you'll see the IP address correlated with it. So now that you see the IP address it should be, we're going to go to the host entry file and actually update it. So now we're going to point bankofamerica.com to Google's IP address, which is 8.8.8.8. So now I'm going to ping it one more time to show you that the correlation has now been updated. So now you can see when we ping bankofamerica.com, we're actually pinging Google's IP address. So we can see that the redirect resulted us to a location we did not intend. We wanted to go to 1.71, but got redirected to 8.8.8. Now let's go see if the OS query agent was actually able to catch this malicious activity. So we're going to go to the OS query logs, and wow, we have a lot of logs here. That's awesome. But the good news is we were able to catch this malicious activity. As you can see here, we can see that a file event occurred, which means the file was updated. We can see the target path is our host entry file. Something has been added and it's been updated at this time. So now that we have the logs, we can actually use it to create an alert. Obviously, right here on the box itself, it looks a little bit ugly, but usually companies will use log management systems. An open source example would be TD Agent, and a paid example would be Splunk to actually gather the logs, and then you would use their query languages to make the alert, and then you would implement it into your alert pipeline. So now that we have the logs needed, we're able to create a scope down alert. So now let's say we create an alert, we put it in the alert pipeline. Now what we need to do is write effective documentation. So here's what a fully written documentation should contain. And really quickly, I want to give a shout out to Palantir's alerting and detection strategy framework, since this documentation is strongly modeled after them. So as you can see, there's a lot of different sections here that need to be addressed in a full documentation. Since this is a shorter talk, I'm going to walk through the sections I deem most critical for a successful alert. So starting off with the goal. So you want to describe the intended purpose of the alert. So for here, the goal of this alert was to detect if a user's host file entry was updated on their box. Next, you want to dive into the technical context. You can't assume that an on-call engineer knows every single technology and knows everything out there. So you want to make sure they're equipped with understanding everything about the alert, especially technology-wise. So for example here, I would add an explanation. What is a host entry file? Why is it important? Where is it located? What is OS query? Where is the OS query configuration logs located? Where are the logs that caught the malicious act located? Why is this important? And give an example of the log file. We really want to make sure they're equipped to fully understand what is going on. Next, it's blind spots and assumptions. So you want to document what you have assumed when you created this alert. So for example, in this alert, we're assuming that OS query is configured and working as expected on the box. Because if OS query is not working as expected on the box, then the alert wouldn't be triggered, right? Because we wouldn't have any files to trigger based off of. So that's what we're assuming here, that OS query is not only working on the box, but as is configured as we expected. Then we're going to go into false positives. Not every alert can be perfect, and sometimes false positives, you already know about false positives that are involved with the alert. So here you want to detail if you know of any instances, because you don't want the on-call engineer to waste any time on an event that we already know is a false positive. That being said, be very careful here. If there are too many false positives that are correlated with the alert, that probably means you need to rescope the alert. Because as we mentioned, it is extremely important to try to reduce the amount of false positives to reduce alert fatigue. So here I said, I don't think there should be any false positives. I don't know why someone is updating your host file and your host entry file on the box itself manually just on one box. So here's one of the most important steps, and I cannot stress this enough, is validation. You do not want to deploy an alert that is riddled with false positives or an alert that doesn't actually trigger when you think it will. If it's riddled with false positives, as we have learned, that places a huge burden on the alerting pipeline. But let's say you have an alert deployed in production and you think you're protecting a certain file or a certain box and catching malicious activity, but it doesn't actually trigger when it should, then you're more vulnerable than ever because you think this section is protected, but it actually isn't because you're not getting alerted when malicious activities happen. So it's extremely important to validate your alert. And when you do validate your alert, make sure you document the steps you took to validate it. So in this example, we obviously didn't do validation because we didn't have enough time, but I would either redo the purple teaming exercise or locally test on my box. And from there, I would document the steps it took to actually trigger this alert. Another important section is the response. In this section, you want to detail the process of triaging and investigating the alert. It should provide all details needed for the on-call engineer to respond and any relevant links. It's extremely important for the on-call engineer to know how to respond, to do it efficiently and quickly. So for example, here I would say immediately contact the user of the box and make them revert back their host entry file. We would then most likely assume their credentials have been compromised and need them to rotate all their passwords. And we would also want to take a look in the time period that we think the attack happened, what kind of PII data was touched to see if any data was stolen during that time. And last but not least, future improvement ideas. Alerts should be agile, continuously getting better as we learn the environment and grow, and documentations should be living. We should give on-call engineers the ability who actually work on these alerts every day to add additional thoughts and to be able to rescope the alert where necessary, right? So one thing we didn't discuss in this talk, which is also a very big topic, is automation. So once you create these amazing alerts that now don't trigger on false positives, you then can add automation to even help the engineer even more, because things that an engineer doesn't need to actually look at or touch should be automated out of the alert pipeline. So for here, currently, I didn't have any ideas because we just created this one together, but since it's a living document, later on, it can get added. So part three would be peer review. You really want to make sure you check the quality of the alert and the documentation. Wow, I'm so sorry because I'm talking too much. So here you want to make sure the documentation is relooked and the alert criteria is also relooked for validation purposes. So just to bring it full circle, remember how I told you, sorry, I'm going to drink some water. Remember how I told you I was waking up in the middle of the night? But after implementing these steps to create high fidelity alerts, my team and I were able to create a strong alerting and detection framework. So now rarely do I wake up at 3 a.m. And if I do, I know the documentation has my back. And it will tell me exactly what is going on and how to resolve it quickly. So cheers to saying goodbye to late night crying sessions and hello to happy mornings. So yeah, here's the resource page that I was mentioning about. Here you have the Palantir documentation and the examples. Here's their GitHub repo, and it lists a lot of examples of how to write effective documentation. Here is the link to my GitHub repo to build the testing environment. Here's the link to my LinkedIn. If you want to connect with me, I love to talk about skiing and I love to connect with women in technology and keep these conversations going. So please feel free to connect, chat with me. And yeah, some extra documentations around how to get started with some of these open source toolings. Also, at my company, we have open positions. So if you want to work with me and work on the things I'm working on, please feel free. So now I'm ready for questions and answers. So I'm going to go ahead and look at the comments page. All right, let's see. What was the learning and detection framework mentioned? So the learning and detection framework mentioned, the one that I structured, my learning and detection framework in this talk and at work, it's Palantir's. Basically, in the resource slide, I have it listed here, and they go through their learning and detection framework and how they came about it. And basically, it just really goes into detail about the type of documentation that should be in place. Because as mentioned, documentation is crucial when it comes to creating these alerts. So yeah, what company did I say I work for? I work for Blend, which is a very awesome company to work for. Any other questions, you guys? I really appreciate your guys' time today, and I really appreciate you guys showing up. I had so much fun talking. There's no other questions. Cool. I'm glad everyone enjoyed the presentation. I will work to get access to the links on my resource page. I will work with the She Security team to make sure it's available, but also my GitHub repo is fully public and my name is Lee Segal. So if you go to GitHub, look up Lee Segal and the name of this talk, you'll be able to find my repo. And there I also added all the resources and all the links and the scripts to how to build the test environment, how to redo this demo, and all the open source tooling documentation is there as well. Is purple team like the trainers or auditors? Purple teaming is not auditors. Purple teaming is blue and red team. So it would be like the incident response team and then the red team, which their responsibility is going in and do the vulnerability testing. If you don't have a red team, most companies are subject to yearly pen testing for their environment, and you can just use those logs to then do a purple teaming event with those logs itself. The most important thing is to get the logs so you know what you're looking for when it comes to vulnerabilities in your environment. Yeah, I think it's a training exercises for both sides. But yeah, mainly it's a training exercise to help the detection and alerting pipeline in your environment itself. Does your red team test every new alert created? How do you scale that? The red team does not test every new alert created. You can also validate through locally testing and things like that. What happens is a red team will go in. For us, it's bi-weekly and start doing all these different hacks, and we'll probably do technology-focused things. And from there, it will be able to test if we were able to catch them in time or not. So you just want to make sure that the alerts you have in place are actually effective. To do for every single alert, you are responsible for your own testing. If you want to work with a purple teamer, you can, but also a lot of times blue teamers have the skill sets to do some basic hacking in a test environment to be able to test their alerts. So the way to scale that is probably for the blue teamer to have some of the abilities to test it themselves. But if not, then another thing we do is alertathons, where once a week we spend 5 hours on these alerts. And then if we need help, we ask the red teamers to join to help us validate our alerts themselves and also help us teach us. So the red team will teach us how to do that. Sure. You guys can find me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to connect on LinkedIn and then continue having conversations about this topic. And yes, I will share all the content and links on the DOS resources channel in Slack. So everyone, I really want to make sure everyone has access to this. Security is so much fun, you guys. Security operations is so much fun. And I really want you guys to play around with the tooling and just have fun. This is a fun concept. This is a fun idea. This isn't stressful. And I really want you guys to go out there and enjoy security like I do. So yeah, I really hope to connect with more people after this talk. All right, I think we may be running out of time. Awesome. So thank you guys so much. I think we're out of time today. I really hope to connect with everyone later. I really appreciate you guys attending this talk, and happy Halloween. Bye, everyone.